Live. Everywhere. On netrootsradio.com. David Waldman. Kagro. In the morning. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? It's Friday. Woo! I'm super excited for Friday. It's good to have a Friday. Friday, March 4th, 2022. As March Fridays in 2022 go, so far the best one we've had yet. That's it. That's the show. All right. I'm preoccupied. Lots of actual real news today. Lots of little tidbits that really shouldn't be occupying any, of my mental capacity whatsoever, but are doing it anyway. And to break it all up, a recorded piece that I want to get to from our friend Darwin today, who has a nose for these things in terms of the news, and now I see it everywhere. I mean, what's really happening here is, of course, he's brought something to my attention, and now I'm paying attention to it, and I see people picking up on the news. But I always like to think of it as hearing the news first from my friends and then saying, aha, see, we knew about this before anybody. And, pretty early on. So we got something to roll there. And I guess we can do that when we need a nice tea break or something like that. The small bore things still occupying my attention. I check each day for some reason because I guess I just can't let go of the pandemic. And I worry that it won't let go of us. I check my incoming email from the, what do they title this thing when they send it to me? Your coronavirus tracker. From the New York Times. And I'm not really sure how I even got that. But somewhere along the line I must have signed up for it. Who knows? It's been a long pandemic. And I ignored it for a long time because I was getting enough of the news elsewhere. But now that I've configured the thing to give us, or they configured to give you the New York City, because they're the New York Times, and New York State, which I also don't really care about that much, then the United States, and really who cares about the United States? And then you could then designate any other areas you wanted to monitor. So then lastly, Loudoun County, Virginia, which, as we know, something, just listen to parents. Anyway, here in Loudoun County, Virginia, where we've just been listening to parents for, about 2 weeks now, since they decided, to hell with everything, no mask mandates in the schools. And Loudoun jumped out first on this one. I think the rest of the Commonwealth followed along on March 1st. So I don't think the Virginia numbers reflect anything huge just yet. We can take a look, and there's nothing huge happening here. I'm just pointing out, though, that the blip upwards that I was talking about the other day has continued now for 3 days, and maybe even more. I hadn't looked back a couple more days, but I have a feeling that in a few days we'll find that our 7-day trend is upward. And, I'm just a little worried about that and how it's going. Today's bump up, 95 new cases reported yesterday, a 13% increase from the day before. There should be some easy buttons that will show you, bring you back to the previous days thing. I guess you could search. I would search in my Gmail for just this email, and then we'll check it out. But it's not too concerning. If you look at it in the big graph, you have the gigantic Omicron spike, which I said at the peak was 885 cases in a single day. And, it did come down. It's nice and symmetrical, the spike. That's pretty good. But then now we're down to kind of where we were in the fall, but now it's starting to curve back up. But, if you look at it, it's just a little tiny, curve up at the end. We're all the way down. It's still about 10% of the numbers we were talking about at the peak. So that's, I guess, good news. And whatever. I'm just keeping an eye on things. And it showed me some information about hospital capacity in the area, and the hospital nearest to me, like if I have to go to the hospital immediately from COVID, my hospital's in the best shape in the whole damn county. Just 70% of the ICU is occupied and 7 available ICU beds. So my whole family could get COVID and go in the ICU, and there'd still be room for 3 friends. Isn't that great? I feel so much better about that. However, the other hospitals in the county are varying shades of orange. So, I guess that's not so good. There's only one ICU bed in Stone Springs Hospital Center. And didn't I just hear last night from somebody who practices there that everything's fine and we've got plenty of room in the hospital. So that was never a great measure for me. But anyway, it's still a 21% decrease from the average 2 weeks ago. So at least we have that going for us, which is nice. Just listen to parents. What kids want these days? Trips to Europe? Certainly not foxtrot lessons. No, they want COVID and they want space in the ICU. So just listen to them and give them what they want. All right, that occupies a little bit of my time this morning. Also, of course, the situation in blank Ukraine and the number of people who are still arguing with one another about whether or not to put the word what is it? Article? The Ukraine in front of it and saying that's sort of colonialist for whatever reason. And I guess it is. And it reminded me of other colonialists. I was thinking back, I didn't know him really very well. Somebody I met back in the olden days who was even more olden than me, but who used to refer to Sudan as the Sudan, which I thought was interesting. And somehow that popped back into my head. So I was wondering, maybe he was talking about a geographical feature, the Sudan, whatever that might be, after which the country was named. So I looked it up in Wikipedia, and no, I guess not. It's just the same old colonialist thing. And when it was just sort of a region, the Sudan region, I'm sure British colonialists originally called it the Sudan instead. I wonder how many other the things are floating around out there. There are definitely a couple of them, but I can't bring them to mind. Anyway, I looked up the Sudan, now just Sudan, and learned this fun and somewhat disturbing fact. Let me see if I can bring it up here on Wikipedia. But anyway, the point here is that, I think I saw it actually on Britannica.com for whatever reason. That came up first in the search. And Sudan, I guess, is essentially held over from Arabic. And, of course, it makes some sense that they would be the first ones, or the ones that we hear from, describing what's going on in this area. And, it was very forthright anyway. Apparently, the whole name translated is basically Land of the Blacks. Like, all right, that's straightforward, I guess. I don't know if you could get away with, naming it that now. But maybe, it seems rather, it's correct, I guess. But they might have asked, couldn't you give us a better description of what goes on there? Or what it looks like, not just what the people look like. Are they nice? But that wasn't the way they named countries back then. Nice land. They have Iceland, but not nice land. So, sorry about that. Anyway, I don't know. I thought it was kind of a downer. Find those things out. I guess it just tells you, people have been making superficial judgments for a long time. Kind of human nature. But, well disguised now. Now nobody knows what Sudan means. So now you do, and you can feel bad about it all weekend. All right. We're doing great. What a start. Okay, we might as well jump into the other stories that I have put aside, because there's a lot of them, not all of which I am going to be able to get through or even explain. But let's see. What have I put in here? In reverse chronological order. Oh, yes. All right. Well, that's an interesting one. But we'll skip that one for now because that goes down a rabbit hole. And we want to go down a different rabbit hole instead. Here's something that Judy Vincent sent me yesterday that I thought was of some significant interest. So I'll use her link for it. I think so. You know what? And I'm just looking back here in my KITM hashtag. And, man, there's a lot to get along to here. All right, where were we? Judy Vincent sent me the link to the Daily Beast story via direct message. So we'll go directly to that one. And I did see something about this yesterday, and someone was tweeting it, and they didn't have a story yet. So now, happily, it's been written up. Interesting development. Former Fox News director Jack Hannock indicted for what? for helping Russia. Okay. How so? An American TV producer, and not just any producers. It turns out somebody in the tweeting yesterday pointed out it was Hannity's producer. An American TV producer was arrested in London, what did Greg start calling it? Londongrad, and now faces criminal charges for working with a sanctioned Russian billionaire. He used to work for Fox News. Written up here in the Daily Beast by Jose Pagliari, right? I believe that's several times we've now called his byline out on these things. But the Londongrad thing goes beyond this. I didn't realize that this guy was in London when he was arrested. But they should basically arrest everybody in London, as it turns out. I got another story on that. As the United States increasingly goes after some of the Kremlin's business tentacles, that's what it says. The latest person arrested for violating U.S. sanctions against Russia is a former Fox News director who left to launch a Russian propaganda network. Well, that will get you in trouble when it comes time to round up Russian allies, I guess. The Department of Justice on Thursday revealed that Jack Hannock, and there's only one N in there, leave off one N for neutrality because he switched sides. Jack Hannock was quietly arrested. Shh, you're under arrest, mate, I guess, you might say, in London on February 3rd, so quiet that we didn't hear about it for a month, for dodging U.S. sanctions by helping a sanctioned Russian oligarch, which one? Konstantin Malofeev. That's the guy. And helped him do what? Start his right-wing Tsargrad TV. That does sound right-wing, doesn't it? Tsargrad? The DOJ simultaneously unsealed a grand jury indictment against him, accusing Hannock of knowingly engaging in business dealings with Malofeev, who had been formally sanctioned by the U.S. government for his role in financing Russia-backed soldiers in eastern Ukraine, who have violently tried to break off from the democratic country since 2014. It's been a while they've been trying to break off. The indictment also accuses Hannock of lying to FBI agents. Anybody think that's a crime still? I don't know. He could get... Maybe Trump will try to pardon him. No one says I can't pardon him, right? No one ever actually wrote that down, so I'm going to do it. Lying to FBI agents about his travels to Greece and Bulgaria. I would lie about that myself, if I had the chance. To expand the TV network in 2015 and 2016 when he was interviewed by American investigators last year in New York City. Federal agents assert that many of the damning details about Hannock's Kremlin adventures were laid out in an unpublished memoir he kept in his email account, which was searched by the feds with a court-approved search warrant. Wow, so basically an online diary. And I guess if you don't want that searched, don't keep it in. It's like, who wants his memoir? All right. Malofeev was sanctioned in December of 2014 by the U.S. Treasury Department's Office of Foreign Assets Control for financing separatists in the Donbas region of the in southeastern Ukraine. I actually tried to insert a "the" there. Russia-aligned fighters operated there with the not-so-secret help of that country's military and used that government's weapons when they shot down Malaysia Airlines Flight 17, don't forget about that, killing 283 passengers and 15 crew members. Malofeev, also spelled in the West as Malofeev, I see, but I guess that's the reason they go with Malofeev, Malofeyev, as opposed to the other spelling, Malofeev, is that it entices us to say Malofeev, as opposed to pronouncing both of the E's. Malofeev. Right? So in order to get us to give it that extra syllable, we put the Y in there. I think that's what's going on with Kyiv as well, right? And who did I say? Oh, yeah, right. Right-wing lunatic Wendy Rogers from Arizona, like out screaming on Twitter about, it's Kiev. We're Americans and we spell it that way and that's all there is to it. Kiev. And I just thought that was like, it's a little weird. Like, they'll literally let anything trigger them. I just never really thought anybody would spend time getting upset about that. Me, I get obsessed about, well, the Sudan, but I don't get that upset about it. But they were very angry. She was very angry about it. And I thought it was also very interesting that she was insisting, here in America, we say it the way Moscow instructs us to, for freedom. And I thought that was odd. But she's an odd person. Anyway, Kyiv, I guess it's not, I guess we were instructed like, well, it sounds like Kyiv. Just say Kyiv, K-E-E-V or K-E-E-V-E. But I guess K-Y-I-V, like there's a little hitch in there. And I guess you should be, I'm guessing it should be Kyiv. But they don't make a full syllable out of it. So it's like Kyiv, I guess, says that it's not E-E. But if you were wondering, that's my interpretation of why we stick the Y in there instead. Because, of course, they don't spell it with a Y at all. They use Cyrillic letters. So it's always difficult to tell what they're trying to do. All right. So Malofeyev, or Malofeyev, depending on how you want to do this, started an Orthodox Christian network called Sargard TV. And the whole thing is on Central Time. You understand the reference I'm making here? Right? 8/7 Central. Well, when they used to do the TV lineups, do they even do that? Do they say that anymore in the promos? Who knows? I don't watch enough network TV to know anymore. Everything's streaming. That's a piece of the culture that's gone. When they used to say something was on every Wednesday at 8/7 Central, and I guess they have local promos out in the West that say different, but in the East, something 8/7 Central, and obviously. Eastern Orthodox, as you know, it's always a day. It's not always a day later, a week later, sometimes not at all, sometimes a week ahead of the time. It's my old joke. So Orthodox Christian Network, the show is on at 8 Central, 7 Mountain. Now, anyway, that's Sargard TV, Orthodox Christian Network. That must be interesting. They are a very interesting sect of the religion, and I always find it fascinating. I just don't know enough about it. And I wonder what a Russian Orthodox televangelist show would look like. Okay, just picture that in your head. In 2020, he launched a similarly named right-wing political group in Russia with an imperialist bent, very important now, that would, much like the National Rifle Association does in the United States, pressure politicians to toe the conservative line. Interesting that they use the NRA as the comparison there. Makes some sense. It's not that they're into guns, but it's a political pressure group, and I guess they just don't have those in Russia, because it was like, why would we listen to popular political pressure about things? Well, according to the Warsaw Institute, a Polish-based geopolitical think tank, Sargard would test political candidates' adherence to, quote, traditional family, religious, and cultural values of the Russian people. And then it would bring them down into a basement and kill their entire family, I guess. Sargard. The Financial Times in 2015 analyzed how Malofeyev launched his conservative yet modern spin on global news. Sounds like a menu. In an attempt to mimic the rise of Fox News. Boo. Seems like a dumb idea. But then that explains why you would hire a Fox News producer for it. Then, in 2018, the online news site Salon called out Hennick for joining the Russian operation. They were really on top of it there, noting that he had previously served as a director for Fox News host Sean Hannity. However, on Thursday, Fox News told the Daily Beast that assertion was wrong and never corrected. How about that? Well, now it's been corrected. I told you about a tweet I read which said that, and it turns out that it was all wrong. Hannick got his start at Fox News when it first launched in 1996. 15 years later, in 2011, he left. And by the way, I think we can tell you, I think Fox News actually started before then, and then they sort of ceased operations briefly, and then they came back out as a conservative network overtly. But I think they actually tried to start as straight news a little while earlier. Anyway, 15 years later, in 2011, he left. 3 years later, he joined forces with Malofeyev's Russian propaganda operation. The Justice Department now wants to extradite him from the United Kingdom to New York City. I love when they just say New York City. Damian Williams, the top federal prosecutor in Manhattan, which is in New York City issued a statement noting that sanctions prohibit United States citizens from working for or doing business with Malafeyev, but as alleged, Hanek violated those sanctions by working directly for Malafeyev on multiple television projects over the course of several years. Williams noted, the indictment underscores his office's commitment to, quote, the enforcement of laws intended to hamstring those who would use their wealth to undermine fundamental democratic processes. This office will continue to be a leader in the Justice Department's work to hold accountable actors who would support flagrant and unjustified acts of war. Well, that's nice. Federal prosecutor's office, I guess, not giving up on things. Manhattan DA, not so interested. And then down at the bottom, there's the correction. A previous version of this story stated Hanek was a producer on Sean Hannity's show. While he worked at Fox News for 15 years, a Fox spokesperson said he never worked on Hannity's program. Hannity distancing himself from this guy. Oh, no, you don't. He didn't work for me. He was just a regular jerk for, 15 years here for somebody else. I wonder who he did produce. No answer on that. We'll see if an answer presents itself. All right. Also in my KITM hashtag column and or direct message column, I thought this was an odd thing. I saw it the other day and retweeted it, and Scott has forwarded it to me in the guise of his Twister Cat persona in Twitter. And good call, definitely worth bringing up. I saw Kentucky reporter Joe Sonka writing about this the other day, and I think I just passed that tweet on. But here's the Huff Post. The Huff Post writing about it. A Kentucky Republican, I am informed by the tweet here, has apologized for false comments. It's good that we note that they're false, that he made about Jewish women and the Holocaust during a debate over anti-abortion legislation. And of course, one, Republicans in the state legislatures can't help but have abortion debates, and two, they can't help but refer in any debate to the Holocaust. But because this also involved women and their reproductive health, he thought he would insult some women and throw in the Holocaust and just insult Jewish women in general. I think there are 2 different days and 2 different comments from this same person. I didn't know for sure that they were the same person, but it makes sense. The guy's obviously, out to lunch. Kentucky lawmaker apologizes after bizarre anti-Semitic rant about abortion pill, according to Josephine Harvey at HuffPost. And our subheader, GOP State Representative Danny Bentley talked about Jewish women's sex lives and said falsely that an abortion pill was created during the Holocaust. Because why not? Just say whatever you want. A Kentucky Republican has apologized, and do we accept everybody? Yes. Yes. You apologize. Very nice. For bizarre and false comments that he made about Jewish women and the Holocaust on Wednesday during a debate over an anti-abortion bill. State Representative Danny Bentley, a pharmacist from Russell, so, he might know something about the origins of a pharmaceutical drug, but it turns out he doesn't, was speaking about legislation to restrict the dispensing of abortion pills when he said, did you know, or I guess in Kentucky, I wonder what kind of accent he's got, but did you know that a Jewish woman has less cancer of the cervix than any other race in this country or this world? And why is that? Because the Jewish women only have one sex partner. And I don't know what to make of it. I mean, it's funny because I'm sure that he resisted apologizing for a little while by saying, what? That's a good thing. That's a good thing. And, not really. Anyway, they don't have multiple sex partners. To say that the Jewish people approve of this drug now is wrong, he said, according to the Louisville Courier-Journal. Wow. And I mean, I wasn't aware that there was the Jewish people had spoken with one voice about one particular abortion pill. But anyway, it gets worse. He also falsely claimed that RU-486 or mifepristone? I don't know how you would pronounce it. RU-486 seems easier than that. Anyway, one of two pills taken to terminate a pregnancy was developed by a Jewish person during World War II and was called... Anybody want to take a guess, unless you've read this ridiculous accusation in the article before? Zyklon B. That's what RU-486, he says, was actually developed during World War II by a Jewish person, and they called it Zyklon B. And most of you will recognize, maybe some of you recognize, that Zyklon B was, well, that was the gas that they used to kill Jews during the Holocaust in the gas chambers. And it's different. But he says, no, it's the same thing. Why would they do it? Because they're making money on it. Because why not? Why would Jews murder Jews? Because money. What are you talking about, anti-Semitic? I'm telling you the truth. Anyway, this drug, RU-486, was developed in the 1980s, not in the 1940s. His comments were condemned by multiple Jewish groups and history. On Wednesday, during a hearing on women's reproductive choice, Representative Danny Bentley went on a bizarre anti-Semitic rant that included outlandish claims about the sex lives of Jewish women and the outrageous assertion that Jews created the abortion pill during the Holocaust to profit financially. Like, why don't you kick us a little bit more here? According to a joint statement from the American Jewish Committee, the Jewish Community Relations Council of the Jewish Federation of Louisville, and the National Council of Jewish Women's Louisville Section. So all of Jewish Louisville up in arms about that one. And why not? We'll get to maybe his useless apology a little bit after this. How about 2 minutes off from this garbage? Hi, everybody. It's me, David. Let's change things up from the old fundraising pitch for just a minute and talk instead about how you can be a part of our show. If you've got a smartphone or any other electronic recording device, why not sit down and record a segment for us? Read us an important article and give us your take. Read one of your own original essays, or even just give us your commentary on something you'd like to share that's important to you. Then send the file to me at kagrox@gmail.com, and I'll try and work it into the show. Short segments, a few minutes in length, are easiest to fit in. And of course, I can't always guarantee that I'll be able to play everything, but if you've ever shouted at your radio or TV about something you wish was being covered, here's your chance to change that. Make the show your own. Send your submissions to me at kagrox@gmail.com. All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio, the Netroots Radio, as a matter of fact. Land of the people who wake up too early and do these shows for no reason. Okay, you're all here for a reason, I'm sure. You want to hear the exciting conclusion of the story as the HuffPost reports it? Well, of course, the condemnation by multiple Jewish groups, and then, of course, the apology. But first, the Jewish groups called on all elected officials to forcefully denounce anti-Semitism and all forms of bigotry. Okay. Well, in a statement to the Courier-Journal, and I think I'd like to go and read that one because I think Joe Sonka might have written the story for them there, and he had the whole transcript of even more of this bizarre rant. And it was a little bit even more bizarre than presented here. But at any rate, in a statement to the Courier-Journal, Bentley said he, quote, meant absolutely no harm in my comments today and sincerely apologize for any, well, it just says, for any they caused. And I assume that they left a word out here. And I don't know whose typo that is, whether it's HuffPost or Bentley or the Courier-Journal. We'll go find out. Any offense they caused, any harm they caused, any enormous twister parties that they call. I don't know. Not really sure what would be fitting in there. And he said that he stood with the Jewish community against hatred. My intention was to speak as a pharmacist to the history of RU-486 and respond to a proposed amendment. I clearly should have been more sensitive with my comments, which elides the entire issue of the history of the pharmaceutical drug. My intention was to speak as a pharmacist to the history of RU-486 by lying about it making stuff up about it or just telling you what I read on the internet about it as opposed to looking it up. I'm sure there's a book somewhere that pharmacists can use that will tell you who developed the drug and when, and you don't have to depend on, say, Stormfront for your information. As a pharmacist, I just wanted to read you a Nazi website and see if you were interested in it. But I did so as a pharmacist. I meant no harm. Well, anyway, Kentucky Governor Andy Beshear said on Thursday that there is no place for anti-Semitism in Kentucky. This he said in a Twitter statement. And, okay. I mean, it's a nice thing to say. It's boilerplate stuff. He probably meant it and all that. I don't think Beshear is being facetious about it. But there is a place for anti-Semitism in Kentucky. Besides Kentucky at large, it turns out that the Kentucky legislature has a place for anti-Semitism because no one's saying that guy is going to get chucked out of the legislature. He's just going to be a bigot and an anti-Semite in the middle of it where there's no place for it. But I'll make one, this guy has to say. Anyway, it comes after another anti-Semitic incident in the state legislature last month that was also denounced by the American Jewish Committee, which gives you some idea of why I say, well, sure, there's a place in Kentucky for anti-Semitism. It's right there in the Capitol. Who was it this time? Representative Walker Thomas and Senator Rick Girdler, both Republicans. No. Well, they apologized after using the anti-Semitic phrase, Jew them down, when discussing a state lease agreement in the legislature. We'll just Jew them down. I meant no offense. I just meant to speak as as a chiropractor to the history of price negotiations, of haggling. Sure. Okay. You know what? There's a place in Kentucky for anti-Semitism, and it's the elected state legislature. So here's the Courier-Journal version of it. Morgan Watkins and Joe Sonka on the byline here. Do they have more? I'll have to sort of see if I can skip down a little bit here and read the actual quotes. Let's see. Bentley falsely said RU-486. One of two pills taken to induce abortion was, developed during World War II and was called Zyklon B, the gas that killed millions of Jews in the Holocaust. I think when I saw he added, the person who developed it was a Jew. Now, what does that have to do with anything in the abortion debate? I don't know. So, okay. Referring to an earlier floor amendment that attempted to allow Jewish women to be exempt from the abortion restrictions in the bill, with the Democrat who filed it, Representative Mary Lou Marzian of Louisville, saying the faith does not believe life begins at conception. Bentley then opined on his perception of the sexual habits of Jewish women, quote, since we brought up the Hebrew family today. I mean, I'm not sure of who Mary Lou Marzian is. And Marzian as a surname doesn't tell me a great deal. But Mary Lou as a given name, give me a pretty good idea. Probably not Jewish, but, maybe converted. I don't know. And I think she was trying to make a political point here, of course, as they bring forward this anti-abortion bill and say, well, we're doing it because, our religion commands. Jesus says that something. And somehow they've got in their head that the Christian religion would be against abortion. And I think the Catholic doctrine still opposes it. And I don't know why Protestant doctrine, is particularly interested in drawing on Catholic doctrine, but they do, whatever. And so they've come to the conclusion because the religions that believe that life begins at conception, therefore you all have to believe that, or at least all practice that in your day-to-day lives. And somebody said, well, what about religions that don't believe that? Can we have an exemption? Practitioners of that religion? It's a pretty clever ploy, right? After Republicans scream all the time about religious freedom or the need to recognize people's religious rights when it's, I'm Christian and therefore I don't want to bake a gay cake, right? Because the cake itself is gay. That's the problem with it. And I don't want to, do this, do that, or whatever it is, and my religion discriminates and I need to be allowed to do that, I guess it's a valid question. Well, my religion says the opposite. Am I allowed to do that? Your law says no abortions, but my religion says we got no problem with it. So what's the story here? And the answer is we have more Republicans in this legislature than there are Democrats, and so no. The answer is you can't have the exemption. Is it hypocrisy to say so? Yes, but again, I don't believe you heard me fully when I said there's more of us than there are of you. Therefore, it's happening anyway. Well, anyway, so here's I guess this comment, which is here, was actually covered in the HuffPost version of it. I guess what I saw the other day. Oh, look at that. Here's a picture of Danny Bentley. And my gosh, you'd never believe that such a person would, in fact, be an ignorant anti-Semite. Well, I guess, two reactions you could have. One, like, yeah, I guess so. He's got the Republican goatee going on. So there's a gun in this picture somewhere. It's just you can't see it in frame. Though the other thing might make you say he's an older gentleman and he's gone gray. And you might think, oh, how cute, Kentucky, and he's dressing up like Colonel Sanders. And, well, not the clothing that he's wearing, but you get the idea. Anyway, as it turns out, that can sometimes hide some weird and virulent anti-Semitism. So I think the original transcript of the discussion on the floor that Joe Sonka was sending around, I understand why it was so confused and weird. I guess they weren't quite sure what they were transcribing, or maybe it was a machine transcribing Zyklon B, and it came out as like XYKLON B or MB, like Zyklon B or something. Anyway, or Zombie, Zyklon B, who knows? Anyway, I guess that's all that's really missing from this, and we got it. It's covered. All right. Don't hang out in the Kentucky legislature if you can help it, I guess, is the real answer here. What else have I got to share with others? Yes, okay. Why don't I read this one? Patrick Snyder shared with us here. I can jump just one more down. I'll come right back to you, Patrick. I skip your things all the time. I apologize. But Matthew Rigdon just making sure that we knew about the pronunciation of Plano, Texas. Yes, it is Plano, not Plano, as you might read it in pidgin Spanish. But okay, and a fun fact included about Plano, Texas. Apple shut down their Plano store because of patent trolls filing in that judicial district. So there you go. Now have fun with that fact. It says it's fun. Take it for what it's worth. Patrick, though, was sending me a detailed breakdown of the multiple reasons why John Eastman's documents on overthrowing the election are not shielded by attorney-client privilege. This one comes from a thread from Mueller, she wrote. You may know about that Twitter account. I also saw Marcy Wheeler tweeting a little bit about it too. And if the reasons are the same, then they'll all be covered here. But if not, I'll jump out and get Marcy's because they were kind of funny. This is really like making an argument that's too clever by half, except, John Eastman's, I guess, not that clever. So we'll just say it's too clever, or maybe it's a little over than that. I don't know. Is it better to credit him with only being too clever by a quarter, or like too clever by 3/4? It's not that clever. Anyway, here's the thread. As promised, Mueller, she wrote, offers up, here is my breakdown of the January 6th committee filing asserting that Donald Trump and John Eastman violated federal criminal law. But as we said, Patrick is sending to us about the good stuff is why Eastman, by his own arguments, perhaps, if it's the same as what Marcy was saying, is not entitled to the attorney-client privilege that he's claiming in trying to dodge giving testimony to the committee. First, we should understand this filing's purpose isn't to only provide evidence of crimes. It's to oppose attorney-client privilege assertions made by Eastman to shield his Chapman University emails from the eyes of the January 6th committee. The crimes are one of the reasons they oppose. I don't know what that's why they oppose, and then it just jumps to the next tweet. The filing contains 7 reasons. Okay, so the filing contains 7 reasons that attorney-client privilege doesn't apply. The first reason is that Eastman failed to establish an attorney-client relationship. That's not a good one. I mean, it's a good objection. It's just not a good thing. Like, if you are going to claim attorney-client privilege, you should make sure that you are actually the attorney for this person. The first reason, no established attorney-client relationship. For months, the committee repeatedly asked Eastman for an engagement letter. Like, show us something where Donald Trump says, thank you for agreeing to represent me or be my attorney, or the campaign or something. Who hires Eastman? And Eastman's not producing it. What he sent them eventually was an unsigned blurb saying he was representing, quote, Donald J. Trump for President Incorporated. And here a screenshot from page 21, I guess, of the committee's brief. The lack of signatures, they note, is critical because the letter itself states that it becomes operative, quote, upon the proper signatures by all parties hereto. So in other words, he sent them a copy of an unsigned contract and said, I have a contract. That's why I'm Donald Trump's campaign's lawyer. But paperwork, I'm telling you, man, the Trump people are no good at it. By the terms of the letter, therefore, the absence of signatures suggests the letter was not operative. Plaintiff's declaration, moreover, does not authenticate this unsigned letter, nor does plaintiff include the cover email by which engagement letter was transmitted, if it was even transmitted. They put that in quotes. There's some suspicion here that in claiming attorney-client privilege, and they said, well, okay, show us the engagement letter. Eastman said, let's forge an engagement letter. Now, why you would do that and not put some signatures in it, I don't know. But was it ever transmitted? We don't even know. Although plaintiff had the burden to establish the elements of the privilege in his opening brief, this unsigned and unauthenticated engagement letter is insufficient to establish an attorney-client relationship during the period at issue, which is January 4th through 7th, as to either President Trump the individual or President Trump's campaign. Any belated effort to cure this defect in his reply by appending a signed engagement letter or the cover email to the letter should not be permitted. And, well, duh. I don't know. That's just pretty dumb. But there's more. Not to mention, this continues, a bunch of emails were received by various third parties, and Eastman fails to meet his burden to show such disclosure did not destroy the privilege. You can't claim attorney-client privilege, in other words, over emails that you sent to a bunch of other people, right? This is just between you and the client. And that is the sort of communication that would be, for which the privilege would be available. Things you meant to keep close just between you and the client. But if you're sharing them with everybody, well, then there's no expectation that that would be held closely, is there? Now, the thread continues. Of course, there are exceptions, but the committee lists those exceptions and systematically shows how none of the third parties meet any of those exceptions. Further, the emails weren't legal advice, but rather advice on political or campaign strategies. Another screen grab here reads, in addition, to the extent that the court finds that plaintiff was providing advice or political campaign strategy rather than law, the communications are not privileged because advice on political, strategic, or policy issues would not be shielded from disclosure by the attorney-client privilege. There might be a deliberative process privilege, derivative of executive privilege, if you were talking about policy or development of legal strategies, perhaps even, but not for political strategies. Okay, let's see. On to the second reason his emails aren't privileged. They're on the Chapman server. Remember, he's working for, what was it, Chapman University or whatever the hell is where he's based. And he's using their email system to use it, to send it. So, when assessing the expectation of confidentiality, when using an employer's server, the court applies 4 factors. Here they are from page 25. The question is, right, you emailed this to the Trump campaign. Do you have the necessary privacy? Are you taking care to keep the communications private such that you could later claim attorney-client privilege? And the answer here, again, no. Courts confronting the issue have applied 4 factors. Does the corporation maintain a policy banning personal or other objectionable use? Does the company monitor the use of the employee's computer or email? Do third parties have a right of access to the computer or emails? And did the corporation notify the employee, or was the employee aware of the use and monitoring policies? And by the way, this comes from the case George Washington University is the style of the title of the case. I don't know who was suing who, but in case you were one of those weird sticklers who would say, but corporation, but this is not a corporation, it's a university. Well, that's incorporated too. And as a matter of fact, the very case we're talking about involved George Washington University. So there you go. These factors point to the conclusion that any intent plaintiff may have had to communicate confidentially over the Chapman server was not objectively reasonable. You were on notice of the policy of Chapman University that you didn't have any serious expectation of privacy in these emails using their servers. You needed, if you wanted privacy, to use a, ironically, private server. That's right. But of course, that means you'll be locked up. No, whatever. All right, let's see. Not to mention, the thread continues, Chapman's network policy says, in all caps, users should not expect privacy in the contents of the university-owned computers or email messages. But Eastman isn't a big fan of adhering to rules that he knows exist, which we will get to in a bit. And we, in fact, got to yesterday when we read the email exchange with Greg Jacob. Anyway, there's a third reason that Donald waived privilege by asking for disclosure to third parties. Eastman said publicly Donald told him to talk about this crap publicly. Whoopsie. And another screen grab. Yeah, President Trump waived privilege by expressly asking for disclosure to third parties. He wanted Eastman to talk this whole strategy up and prepare the country for his coup. And, well, then you don't have any privilege in it if that's what you wanted done with it. Fourth reason, Eastman failed to meet his burden to invoke the work product doctrine, which means he would have to establish that the emails were in preparation for litigation instead of for some other purpose. Nope. Okay. That one doesn't work either. And that was something that Marcy was discussing a little bit here, right? He's I'll get through this thread and maybe then we'll turn to what Marcy had to say about it if we get a chance, and that'll explain more. Fifth, the committee can't get this stuff anywhere else. These documents are pivotal and the committee has a substantial need for them. That's an actual way to pierce through attorney-client privilege. Ordinarily it would be privileged, but there is a compelling state interest in getting this information and there's no other place where it's available. And then, of course, there's the crime fraud is another of the exceptions, and that helps, and they work in tandem. Yeah, sure, it's the only place you can get it, but why do you need to get it? Well, a compelling state interest. What's the state interest? Prosecuting crime against the state. Oh, well, okay then. And a little bit of discussion of that in the brief, but I think we can skip that one. And now the biggie. The sixth reason, communications in which a client consults an attorney for advice that will serve him in the commission of a fraud or crime are not privileged from disclosure. That's the crime fraud exception. We've talked about that one. Here, the House asks for an in-camera, that is to say, behind closed doors in the judge's chambers, review of the emails because they have established a good faith belief that Trump and others may have engaged in criminal and or fraudulent acts. The crime, 18 U.S. Code Section 1512C2. This is the one, Mueller, she wrote, says, This is the one I've been yelling about for months. Want to see what the screen grab says? Obstruction of an official proceeding. That's the one. And I think we've discussed that one at length enough that we don't need to go into it more. Another one, crime number 2, 18 U.S. Code Section 371, conspiracy to defraud the United States. That one is a little bit more interesting, and we haven't discussed that one at great length yet, but perhaps later. And then the 7th, there is also evidence to support a good faith, reasonable belief that in-camera review of the material may reveal that Trump and members of his campaign engaged in common law fraud in connection with their efforts to overturn the 2020 election. One of the elements of proving the crimes is proving that Donald knew he lost. That's an issue. The House says, but let me count the ways. 1, no legitimate state legislature certified alternate slates. 2, Trump lost more than 60 times in court and his lawyers have been disbarred or sanctioned. 3, Jason Miller apparently testified to the committee that he told Donald he lost in pretty blunt terms. Number 4, DHS CISA, I'm not certain what we're talking about here, but DHS issued a public statement saying there was no evidence that the vote was compromised. 5th, Barr, remember him, said there was no evidence of voter fraud that would change the outcome. 6th, another Trump aide told the committee that he advised Trump that Barr was right on several occasions. 7, Rosen and Donahue told him he lost. Number 8, Ken Cuccinelli told him he lost. 9, Pat Cipollone told him he lost. 10, Mark Meadows told him he lost. The dude knew. Here, in the next tweet, are Barb McQuaid and I discussing just how much Donald knew he lost in this podcast connected to this. And then the smoking gun email where Eastman says he knows what he was asking for was against the law. You remember this one? Did we read this one yesterday? This is Eastman to Greg Jacob, January 6th at night. No, I don't think we got to this one. 9:44 p.m., long after things were over on the Hill. The Senate and the House have both violated the Electoral Count Act this evening. How so? They debated the Arizona objections for more than 2 hours. And as you know, the Electoral Count Act says the debate shall go on for no longer than 2 hours. But that's one of those rules that gets bent every once in a while, mostly by unanimous consent, even though they don't go on the record to say let's have more time, but nobody objects. That's, though, a violation of Title 3 U.S. Code Section 17. And the vice president allowed further debate or statements by leadership after the question had been voted upon. That also violates the Electoral Count Act. And they had that debate upon motion approved by the VP in violation of the requirement in Section 15 that after the vote in the separate houses, quote, they shall immediately again meet. So some timing violations in there. So his argument here is, well, if there's a technical violation of the Electoral Count Act at points 1, 2, and 3, why can't there be an additional technical violation? Well, you're not allowed to debate for more than 2 hours. Well, you debated for 2 hours and 1 minute. That violation. So therefore, the vice president can simply rule that Trump won. The end. Well, hold on a second. Yes, they're both violations of the Electoral Count Act, but they're not alike. But that's what he's arguing. So now, he says, now that the precedent has been set that the Electoral Count Act is not quite so sacrosanct as was previously claimed, I implore you, Greg Jacob, to consider one more relatively minor violation and adjourn for 10 days and allow the legislatures to finish their investigations, as well as to allow a full forensic audit of the massive amount of illegal activity that has occurred here. But that's all QAnon spew. And by the way, because you debated for 2 hours and 1 minute, can't you see your way clear to, instead of the two houses again immediately meeting in joint session, can't you instead say, well, what if we suspended proceedings for 10 days and everybody went their separate ways? That's a much larger violation than extending debate for a couple extra minutes past 2 hours, or even 2 more hours for that matter. Much, much bigger departure, don't you think? But it's okay because, quote, the massive amount of illegal activity that has occurred here, of which I've never been able to prove even a drop. But whatever. If none of that moves the needle, at least a good portion of the 75 million people who supported President Trump will have seen a process that allows the illegality to be aired. That's John's big argument here. Okay, pretty dumb. Let's see. Here's the relevant and rather hilarious testimony of Donahue is included here, referring back to old posts from Mueller. She wrote, okay, let me see if I can find then in the few minutes or seconds that we have left in between now and our break what I saw, much shorter version of it really, believe it or not, from Marcy that I was retweeting yesterday, but it's going to take me a little while to find it. I didn't know I was going to go here. You know how this happens. Let's see. At any rate, it was just sort of interesting watching him fail on this front. Yeah, here we go. Okay, and there's my alarm for the break, but I think we can probably get that one in there. Here we are. Marcy saying Eastman is going to be hoisted on his own petard because he works at a Big Brother university. That's the issue of his having used Chapman's server and having no expectation of privacy in it. But there was a second one here. The January 6th committee. Yes, right. Here we go. The committee saying, since your plan was to do this with no sanction from the courts, right? You remember the email exchange with Greg Jacob in which he says, I know the Supreme Court probably won't uphold this, but I still think this interpretation of the law is right. Well, since you plan to do this with no sanction from any courts, you can't argue that your communications were made in anticipation of litigation. You were planning to avoid litigation and simply make your case in the streets with violence. Yeah, that's not litigation and therefore not privileged. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. Let's see. Okay, so just a little bit more expansion on what that last point was about. So Empty Wheel, again, tweeting the January 6th committee basically saying, you are making the claim that there should be attorney-client privilege here. You haven't established that you're the attorney for any client or that this client has, they clearly have some attorneys, but you're not one of them. We're not sure that you can actually prove that. But on top of that, attorney-client privilege relates to materials produced in anticipation of litigation or some other legal proceeding. Even if that legal proceeding never takes place, the idea is, in case there ever is one, even if it's only a faint possibility, if we're preparing this work product, these communications, in anticipation of that, then you've established, okay, I'm an attorney. You're my client. We've seen the letter. We understand that there's an engagement process here and that this relationship exists. Now, does that mean that anything that this attorney sends to you is privileged? No. If there's plans for a crime, of course, there's the crime fraud exception, but it also falls outside of the communication, and it doesn't have to be about crimes or frauds. It's a bad example because there's a whole other exception that applies to that. But if it's a letter about anything, like for whatever reason you don't want to disclose the news that you are interested in a certain television program, it's great. I love that television program. But I have testified elsewhere that I hate that television program. Whatever the reason is that you don't want to disclose it, right? Just sending a letter to your client about nothing in particular and then claiming attorney-client privilege, unless you can make a plausible argument that that communication had something to do with preparation for legal work, litigation of some kind, then it's questionable. I don't know that I would actually privilege that. So what's the problem here? We'll read the excerpt from the committee brief. The plaintiff has failed to meet his burden to establish that these materials were prepared in anticipation of litigation. His memo, right? As opposed to primarily for another purpose. Numerous documents make no reference to any pending litigation or anticipated litigation for which these materials were prepared. Indeed, plaintiff emphasized, quote, The main thing here is that Pence should do this without asking for permission, either from a vote of the joint session or from the court. Well, if you're not going to be asking for any permission from the courts, you're clearly not interested in litigation. So it must be something else that you're talking about. That's actually pretty clever and pretty funny that it would trip him up. But it's only one of, what did we say, 7 reasons why this thing, his emails and the memo, which I guess we already have, shouldn't be subject to any kind of attorney-client privilege. So, very interesting and fun. Glad we had a moment for it. Other things to consider. Something else that I saw mentioned, and I guess to get back to the Londongrad story. There's a couple of London-related stories out there, or UK-related stories out there that I thought I would share. The first from The Guardian. This unhappy for this person's news. Ukraine-born oligarch Mikhail Watford found dead at home in Surrey. What do you know? That's weird. I don't think it was high-rise or anything. Police say the death of the businessman who made his fortune in, you'll never believe it, oil and gas, is unexplained but not suspicious. Okay. A Ukraine-born oligarch has been found dead at his home in unexplained circumstances, Surrey police have said. I would say in American English, under unexplained circumstances, as opposed to in. Like you just said, dead at his home in, and I thought you were going to say in Surrey, but instead you said unexplained circumstances, and it makes me think that's the name of the town. But not for long. Officers are treating the death of 66-year-old Mikhail Watford, who made his fortune in oil and gas after the demise of the Soviet Union, as unexplained, but they said it was not thought to be suspicious. Not by them, but okay. The news comes as attention focuses on oligarchs in the UK, who are thought to be members of Vladimir Putin's inner circle after Russia's invasion of Ukraine. And that's an interesting question. By the way, it's linked to another article entitled Liz Truss says she has a, quote, hit list of oligarchs facing UK sanctions. That's not actually, on my agenda to talk about, but there is another weird UK-related story. But we'll get through a little bit more of this one. It follows the attempted murder on UK soil of the former Russian double agent Sergei Skripal and his daughter, which the Kremlin is accused of ordering, as well as other attacks blamed on Russian authorities. There is no suggestion, however, that Watford has been the target of British-backed sanctions owing to a proximity to Putin or of a Russian operation. Surrey police said his body was found on Monday at an address near Virginia Water, between, never mind, is it Slough, maybe, Slough, and Woking, to the west of London. Oh, boy. Anyway, this is English, and I still can't pronounce it. We were called around midday on Monday, February 28th, following reports of the discovery of a man's body at an address in Portnall Drive, Wentworth, a spokesperson said. Isn't it amazing? There's a thing about British addresses and locations is there's 59 different ways to refer to it, and you're like, oh, I don't get it. Like here in the United States, well, Surrey, Wentworth, Portnall, Woking, Slough, what? Where is this place? Just give me the address. I don't know how Google Maps works out there. Anyway, an ambulance was called, but the man, who was in his 60s, was sadly pronounced dead at the scene. His next of kin are aware and are being supported by specially trained officers. An investigation into the circumstances of the death is underway, but it is not believed there are any suspicious circumstances at this time. Although I wonder what the specially trained officers are. Anyway, Watford was born, in case you were wondering about that last name, Mikhail Tolstoshaya, like Tolstoy, but with Shaya on the end, in Ukraine in 1955 during the country's Soviet era. He was commonly known as Misha, and according to the Sunday Times, anglicized his surname after moving to the UK. He initially settled in London, where he lived with his Estonian wife, Jane, before moving to Surrey. Where are we here? The paper reported that Watford considered that his childhood, spent in a big four-bedroom apartment with a bath and a car, was very comfortable in Soviet-era Ukraine. In terms of luxury, it was the equivalent of traveling by jet now, he told the paper in 2015. His mother, who the Sun reported lived in a neighboring apartment in his villa and was at home when his body was found, was said to have insisted on keeping her Soviet ID in a safe. She strongly believes communists will be back to Russia and Ukraine. Ooh, she might be right. Meanwhile, she's enjoying modest spending of her capitalist son's money. And we are praying her dream never comes true, Watford told the Sunday Times. Ooh, she's pro. Yeah, interesting. I had no idea. According to the paper, she had 3 children. Michael, his son by a first marriage, his and Jane's daughter, Michelle, and their youngest, Alexander. Okay. So, interesting story, but not as weird and unusual on its face anyway, as the other UK-related story that I saw circulated. Only the story was connected to a podcast, which, of course, we can't just play here, but what an interesting thing. And then I went and looked the guy up a little bit just to find out a little bit more about him. This is Paul Galizia, who tweets about his podcast and his investigation into how Evgeny Lebedev became not just a UK resident, but a member of the House of Lords. This, although, by the way, all against the advice of the security services. And, well, why would it be against their advice? A number of reasons, not limited to the fact that his father is a Kremlin agent, a former KGB agent, in fact, and offered to act as a back channel between Boris Johnson and Putin over the Skripal poisonings. Wow. So how do you end up about, in the House of Lords? There's a couple more tweets here from Paul, who says, it began actually as a story about the easy seduction of the British establishment, I guess the establishment of Londongrad. How so? With an MDMA-fueled midsummer Russian fantasy gala, where Orlando Bloom and Salman Rushdie danced with Mikhail Gorbachev, with the purchase of newspapers, befriending of politicians and celebrities, and then Russia invaded Ukraine. And it became a study of Londongrad, how the UK capital welcomed Russian oligarchs looking for a safe haven for their fortunes, and the pains those oligarchs go through to stay on side with Putin even now. It's actually quite fascinating, and it motivated me to search around a little bit and see if I could find more information about this guy. And I think, I guess I just didn't park any of it in, there was nothing terribly satisfying as full development of this guy's story, but it was pretty interesting. Evgeny Lebedev is his name, and there were a couple of hits. And, in addition to Wikipedia, there were some news hits from, I think there was something from the Daily Mail, which, I'm not sure how trustworthy it is, but I guess in this atmosphere, well, it's not Pravda exactly, but everybody's looking for some juicy details now. So let's see. He's the most recent piece, I guess, but there's a mention of him in the New York Times. We could go over there. UK moves to tighten laws on oligarchs. Critics say it's too late. And Evgeny here is the lead picture. So let's take a look. With most of the Western world uniting against Russia's invasion of Ukraine, Britain is trying to plug loopholes for wealthy Russians to which it has long turned a blind eye, like including giving them life peerages and putting them in the House of Lords. Yeah, that's kind of dangerous, right in your legislature. Although the House of Lords, it's kind of a weird thing. They don't really have that much control, but how about that? Here's the first couple of paragraphs here. 18 months ago, Evgeny Lebedev was ushered into the clubby inner circle of aristocratic Britain, the House of Lords, to which he had been nominated for a life peerage by his good friend, Prime Minister Boris Johnson. This week, Mr. Lebedev, a 41-year-old Russian-British newspaper baron, found himself on far less comfortable ground. Writing on the front page of his paper, London's Evening Standard, Mr. Lebedev implored President Vladimir Putin of Russia to call off his brutal invasion of Ukraine. As a Russian citizen, and he still says that, even though he's sitting in the House of Lords. But, Britain has weird leftover laws about that. I was thinking about how odd that seems in the modern context, but it used to be the case fairly frequently among the nobility that they held titles in different countries, so I guess there's a long history of that there. As a Russian citizen, I plead with you to stop Russians killing their Ukrainian brothers and sisters. That's good, said Mr. Lebedev, whose father was once a KGB officer. As a British citizen, I ask you to save Europe from war. As a Russian patriot, I plead that you prevent any more young Russian soldiers from dying needlessly. Mr. Lebedev's carefully calibrated message reflected the suddenly tricky landscape for wealthy Russians in Britain. Mr. Putin's assault has thrown a harsh spotlight on oligarchs. Most amassed their fortunes thanks to their ties to the Russian leader. They have used London, with its laissez-faire regulatory climate, as a haven to stash wealth or to launder ill-gotten gains. Now, with most of the Western world uniting against Mr. Putin's aggression, Britain is moving to plug an embarrassing loophole to which it has long turned a blind eye. On Tuesday, the government introduced new legislation in Parliament to try to curb the gusher of dirty money into Britain. Under the law known as the Economic Crime Bill, foreign companies that own property would have to declare the true owners or could ultimately risk confiscation of their assets. They're beginning to feel the heat. Misha Glenny, author of McMafia, a book on organized crime that inspired a popular TV series, said of the oligarchs. But he said of the plans to tighten the rules, there is an element of shutting the stable door after the horse has bolted. Like, for instance, I guess Evgeny is going to have a vote on it, but maybe he'll be outvoted. It's just a weird, strange story. So that's sort of a different angle on what's going on. But you know what? I should pocket that so that we can have that available. A little bit of what I read in the Daily Mail perhaps deserves a bit of reading. Now, 3 oligarchs, including Evening Standard owner Evgeny Lebedev, call for an end of the Ukraine invasion as the media mogul asks Putin to save the world from annihilation. So, some nice light cast on what he's doing here. But this was, did this one discuss the evolution of his relationship with Boris at any point here? It really doesn't, I think. But at any rate, very interesting. Maybe it was the Wikipedia profile that I saw that I thought was just so interesting in terms of, how he ingratiates himself to the British upper classes. But it's really basically as a matter of, it brings all this money from God knows what with him to London and buys newspapers and then just runs around, being generally British. And I imagine lending his support in the pages of his newspaper to prominent politicians. And the payoff is going to make you, a baron, Lord Lebedev, and let you sit in the legislature of our country. It's weird the way Britain blurs its lines like that. But like I said, I guess they have a long history of doing that, so maybe it's not so strange to them in the way it is to us. All right. Well, there's more. Let's see. Other things to share here. I'm going to scroll back down a little bit here. That was of some concern. Yes, this was... And what else do I have here from Spy Talk? This is an interesting and concerning issue. Russian group aims to lead global white supremacist terror movement. Something we've known about for a little while here, but as the accusations fly over propaganda in the Russia-Ukraine war, or Russia's invasion of Ukraine, and they are claiming to be there to denazify, right, Ukraine, but most people will recognize that as propaganda. But they are able to point to an element of ultra-right, conservative, nationalist, white supremacist presence in Ukraine. You should know, of course, that there's a similar element in Russia. They're both portrayed in most writing as being fringe and not representative of the mainstream. Although we keep saying that here too, and then we find out, oh, well, look at that. As it turns out, a nice civil debate in the Kentucky State Legislature turns out to be just as Nazi-ish as Stormfront, so you never know. But that brings me back to something that we discussed on the air a couple of days ago at Athena's suggestion, right? She had written me about the question of, well, are you going to cover the story of the discrimination, the racism that African students and immigrants and Indian students and immigrants are facing at the borders as they're trying to flee Ukraine? And we did. We brought that up and read about it. Now, here's some interesting twist on it. It turns out that this, too, is being weaponized in the propaganda war. I think it's actually, what's happening is happening, and they have video of what's going on. And it could always be the case, as is frequently the case in some of these situations, that it's just understood very differently by the various parties to the problem here. And sometimes one of the alternative explanations is actually even legitimate, but failure to communicate makes things worse. As we imagined, it could have been the case that either, or both, either some of the border guards are in fact virulent racists, and why not? There are some pretty virulent racist border guards right here in the United States, so that could certainly be happening. Or it could be a matter of, well, we want to process Ukrainians first because reasons, nationalist reasons, or it's easier. We understand their passports and they're just easier to process, and we'll save all the complicated work for later. It could be anything in between or any combination thereof. But it turns out, I saw the tweet from Dave Johnson, who many of you know and follow on Twitter, that noting the fact that the more pointed accusations of racism are being shared very widely by what some of the available applications will tell you is most likely, or are most likely, Russian bots. So it wouldn't surprise me. It's not that this stuff isn't happening. It's that it's being exploited after having happened by Russian bots, and that will occur. Here's one that is just a tweet about the same issue. Look at how Ukrainian forces are pushing aside the black girl while they allow a white girl to get through. And then an FU Ukraine, hashtag racism, hashtag Africans in Ukraine, hashtag racist EU. Well, all of which could be true or have some underlying truth. Not only does the thing happen, and it might be happening for racist reasons, but it would be all too pleasing and all too easy for Russian bots to do that and exploit and to jump onto that burgeoning Africans in Ukraine hashtag and try and drum up sentiment for Ukraine being the racist party in all of this. So you do want to watch out for that and take it with that grain of salt close at hand, even if you don't actually have to consume the salt. The fact that you have that grain will remind you of this. On the other hand, there's also other things to look out for. For instance, this bit here from a Twitter account labeled Aneta, A-N-E-T-A, Aneta Molenda, if you're looking for it. And let me pocket this one here so that I can include it in the roundup. I grew up in Poland, near Ukraine. The racism is even worse than we're seeing on English-speaking social media. White nationalism in this particular area, and it's named here. It's in Polish, and I can't even begin to guess the pronunciation of it. But white nationalists in that area are coordinating attacks on non-white refugees, in particular Africans, after they get across the border to safety, quote unquote safety. So it's not just happening on the Ukraine side of the border, and it's just a bunch of Ukrainian racists, as the Russians would prefer you to believe, although I'm sure the Russians would be just as happy for you to believe that Polish people are racist as well. But every country has its racists, and wherever there are vulnerable migrants, they are going to look for them and single them out. But it's happening, and it's not just at the border, and you should be aware of that as well. That helps round out the story that Athena brought to my attention. It continues here. Last night, 4 white nationalists physically attacked 3 black refugees from Ukraine near the train station in this town. And God help me with the name of the town. PRZ. I'm already lost. PRZEMYSL with an accent mark on the S, which means I don't know what in Polish, but I don't know what. Przemysl? I don't know. That might be a bad guess. At any rate, local news outlets and activists are reporting that the attackers are driving around in cars with baseball bats and bottles. And there's an attached article here, but it too is in Polish. The whole thing is in Polish, so no hope. Although I wonder if we could do a Google Translate. But at any rate, Aneta goes on and says, many white people on the ground and abroad are engaging in mass gaslighting of experiences of black and brown refugees. They argue that the problem only exists on the Ukraine side, or give examples of individuals who didn't have trouble at the border, as if racism is all or nothing. White nationalists in Poland are spreading disinformation about an increase in crime, break-ins, and rapes in recent days. This belief is so widespread that police precincts are publicly shutting down the lies and urging non-white refugees to travel in groups for safety. I'm glad that they're doing their work there. I'm sure there are probably some white nationalists in the police force too, though, screwing things up for everybody else. Neo-Nazis are coordinating attacks in a Facebook group called, it's in Polish, so I can't help you with that one, but oh, goodness. Never mind. At any rate, you'll have to look at it yourself. That was, anyway, this Facebook group created yesterday. This is written on March 2nd, so created March 1st. They had 10,000 members 8 hours ago. Almost 14,000 now, so sounds like bot activity. The description asks to post photos and warn others, quote, if you see refugees who aren't native to Ukraine. Their posts are getting reported. The admins are now asking to please use censored language. They've come up with ways to coordinate hate crimes with code words. One post asks, where are volunteers meeting up? And edits that he means volunteer professors. Lots of winking emojis. One member posts about a person of color eating alone at the local McDonald's. Hint, hint, go get 'em. The post uses slang and dog whistles that would be hard to understand unless you're a native Polish speaker. Certainly hard to pronounce, anyway. The replies say they should put pork in his order. And does he want to choke? Wow. White women in a group are cheering on the neo-Nazis. One member posts, you're doing the work in the name of women who felt we were in danger. Big thank you. Hundreds of comments celebrate. Don't know how many of them are bots, but what's the, so that's pretty interesting. Some pushback too, of course. People wondering, I don't know, why are you saying all of this? Are you saying all Polish are racist, or am I a bot trying to tell you to stop looking at how much bot activity there is here so that we can carry on with our racism? Anyway, very confusing situation. Things happen on all sides, but I guess the lesson here, I probably didn't need to actually teach you, but a good reminder. There are probably racist extremists on every side of every border and everywhere in between. It's kind of a, big problem among white people everywhere, wherever you go. Different people, the others, it happens. any rate, no point in trying to think that it's only happening in Ukraine on the Ukrainian side. Certainly plenty of proof that it's happening inside Russia as well. And history kind of tells the story. The whole area, it's been a little insular. We'll be right back. Hi, it's me, David Waldman, the same guy who was just talking to you a second ago. Our Patreon subscription drive is still going strong, with over 175 monthly donors who help keep us on the air. If we've helped keep you going during the pandemic, why not return the favor and help us keep going so we can all be together for the next disaster? Patreon.com, Patreon.com, makes it easy to make secure, recurring monthly contributions to support our show. Patreon.com/KagroX gets you straight to our donation page. Maybe you'd like to thank us for keeping you sane during the Trump era. Maybe you're looking forward to in-depth explanations of what's going on in the Biden administration. Whatever it is that keeps you listening, we need your help to keep bringing it to you. And hey, if you happen to prefer using PayPal or even the Square Cash app, we're up and running with those options too. Thanks again, everyone, for all your support. We literally could not do this without you. All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Roots Radio. Here's something random I just thought I would throw in here, something surprising that just went by on Twitter. Who'd have guessed it? Market sentiment is the tweeter here. It's MKT_sentiment. Breaking, it's got like little sirens or the lights next to it. This is weird, but back to Kentucky. State of Kentucky's teacher retirement system was the second largest shareholder in Sberbank of Russia, the largest bank in Russia, SBER, Sberbank, right? Name we've called a couple of times. What an interesting thing. And it's interesting to see that the second largest, like what a position to hold in that bank. I understand, you're going to put your assets wherever, blah, 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 investment strategies, but to end up as the second largest shareholder in any bank, much less a Russian bank, seems like a bad idea. And it bears out here. Their position has dropped 95% in value, thanks to the sanctions, I guess, from $13 million. Is that right? 13 million? Because that doesn't seem like it would really be all that much money in terms of being the second largest bank shareholder. But okay, 13 million, is that the abbreviation? It's 13 mm. Dropped down to 778,778K. That one I understand. And my goodness, that seems pretty strange. So holding 863,910 shares. I guess there's just not a whole lot of shareholders in this bank, but who are the rest of them, by the way? The top is Todd Asset Management, LLC, who owns 1.6, almost 1.7 million shares. And I guess they lose their shirt in that one. Then the Teachers Retirement System of the State of Kentucky. Renaissance Group, LLC, Cullen Capital Management, LLC, Henry James International Management, Incorporated, Boston Private Wealth, LLC. Good. All of you should lose all your money. Invest in something real. Anyway, that is interesting too. Market sentiment goes on to say what's even more interesting is that the top 3 institutional holders in that Russian bank are all from Kentucky. I didn't realize that Todd Asset Management is based in Louisville, and Renaissance Group LLC also in Kentucky, Covington, Kentucky. Either it's the mother of all coincidences or something interesting is going on. What do you think? That's pretty amazing. And golly, I mean, somebody else here says 2 reasons come to mind, and the pictures are of Rand Paul and Mitch McConnell. That's pretty astonishing, really. I would not have guessed it, and I guess it must have surprised them. But then what was the deal with that aluminum plant that they were bringing to Kentucky? And then there's some dirty crap going on here. London grad isn't the worst of it, I don't think. All right, a million other things I want to share with you, including I still want to get to Darwin's piece here, and I know we can fit that in, but let me see what other things I wanted to share. Just sort of at random. One, I saw an interesting thing that flew by on Twitter the other day, and I put it aside because, every once in a while we talk about the craziness of sovereign citizen types and the weird, their new plan to flood school boards with bogus lawsuits that claim all sorts of crazy things, like that they're entitled to payments from the insurance companies, from surety bonds for the school boards because something. You're breaking all the laws. How so? You're teaching the CRT or something, and so now you got to pay me or whatever it is. Or mask mandates are against international law. Pay me. And you wonder just how crazy they get. Well, this was an illustrative thread, I thought. Just random. A guy by the name of Kevin who tweets as Knife Nerd. I guess he's into knives. And that's super interesting. But okay, strange people get into strange things. Anyway, Knife Nerd, though, sends us this. Oh dear, there is a warrant for my arrest, which you might not think is unusual for somebody who's into knives. But here's a little background information. Yesterday, we got a 1-star review. He's got a knife store. We got a 1-star review from a dude that didn't want to wear a mask in our Edmonton shop. So a Canadian knife nerd and all of that. Didn't want to wear his mask, and so he gives the shop a 1-star review. But there's more. It's the law, of course, in Edmonton, and you need a mask, but he was very unhappy with us. I hope we can struggle along without him. And there's a screenshot of the angry post from Roadie Road Rash. 1-star review saying extremely rude and unintelligible staff. I'm not certain whether he really means unintelligible, but anyway, everything feels like, quote, made in China. Whatever. Anyway, Kevin goes on to say, today we received an email from Mr. J. Freedom. It looks like a totally official verdict from the International Common Law Court of Justice. Aha. Who's Mr. J. Freedom? He's Joseph Freedom, 2022, in case you want to email the guy. And he sends a note to Knifeware Edmonton. That's the name of the shop. Attention, management, all staff, all administration, all management, again, all services, and all locations. Update attached on January 15th, 2022. Verdict from the International Common Law Court of Justice. This is to notify you that you have been served by We the People, March 2nd, 2022. Yeah, pretty much, but they think it's real. This is the sort of people you're dealing with. I was obviously shaken, Kevin says, but grabbed my courage and opened the attachments. Oh dear. The first attachment was a 2-pager. And here's what it says. Up at the top, like a press release, it says, for immediate release, HRH, Her Royal Highness, Queen Lady Romana Diduolo, or what is it? Didulo, Didulo. Remember? I don't know. We didn't mention on the show, but I did notice the other day, in the middle of the trucker thing, I guess, somebody was saying something about, there's this weirdo running around calling herself the Queen of Canada. Not the weirdo running around in England saying she's the Queen of England and so therefore also the Queen of the Commonwealth, including Canada, but a totally different person. But not the Queen of, the British Commonwealth, just Canada. So, what's the story here? Here is a May 28th, 2021 pronouncement. And, of course, what would that have to do with a guy visiting a knife shop in March of 2022? I don't know. But here it is. To the attention of the Prime Minister of Canada, Deputy Prime Minister, Health Minister, Health Officers, PHAC, CDC, Provincial/Territorial Premiers, Provincial Health Ministers, Health Officers, Armed Forces of Canada, Chief of Police/RCMP, Mayors, Doctors, Nurses, and Pharmacists. And with copies to the Commander-in-Chief of the United States Armed Forces and the Commander-in-Chief of the Federation Command Forces and Allied Forces, it is a cease and desist order. Dear Sirs, I, Romana Didulo, Head of State and Commander-in-Chief, Head of Government of Canada and Queen of Canada, bring to your immediate attention and order you to cease and desist all the genocide and crimes against humanity under natural law, common law, treaty law, Articles 6 and 7 of the International Criminal Court Statute, the Nuremberg Code, the Geneva Convention, the United Nations Convention, the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples in your jurisdiction. What are those crimes that you now need to stop? 1. All COVID-19/coronavirus 19 vaccinations and experimentation, parentheses, genetic biowarfare, across Canada. 2. All PCR testing across Canada. All masking, private and public spaces, all transportations across Canada. All lockdowns across Canada. All quarantines, all closures of provincial and territorial, nothing, no extra word there. All closures of international borders. So basically, all COVID mitigation needs to stop because this person who says she's the Queen of Canada says so. Or, I'm sorry, she says that the International Common Law Court of Justice says so. This will serve as your lawful notice to cease and desist all further actions described above, effective immediately. Furthermore, I declare all of Canada open upon publication of this order, including all borders between the United States and Canada. Special notes. A. Joseph Joe Biden is not president of the U.S., and the U.S. Armed Forces have been in control since January 14th, 2021. Okay. And B, an email from the Commander-in-Chief of U.S. Armed Forces has been sent to the Armed Forces of Canada last night, acknowledging and confirming my authority as Head of State and Commander-in-Chief, Head of Government of Canada, and Queen of Canada. Govern yourselves accordingly. Signed and sealed, HRH Queen Lady Romana Didulo, Head of State and Commander-in-Chief, Head of Government of Canada, Queen of Canada. Queen's official seal and signature, I guess, is supposed to follow below. No seal, no signature. Instead it says, signed, we the people. Not the Queen, but we the people, which really, I mean, do you even say like we the people about anything up in Canada, or is that just stolen from the American phrasing of it? Maybe. I mean, you have people there. Well, wow. At the top, like we said, it starts as a press release, but then morphs into, well, I don't really know. It's from the Queen of Canada, who has inexplicably changed her name from Elizabeth, and then finishes by saying it's signed by the Queen and we the people, but I don't see any signatures. Kevin continues. Now, more worrying is this totally real and legal warrant for my arrest. To prove how important this document is, it was attached 3 times. More times equals more important. At least this document was signed. And what's it say? Arrest warrant from the International Common Law Court of Justice, issued in accordance with its lawful verdict and sentence in the matter of case docket number. Got a number and everything. It's 0915-2021-A001. The court authorizes its sheriffs and their appointed deputies to immediately detain and deliver for the execution of their sentence the persons named in this warrant. The sheriffs and their deputies are empowered to call upon other police forces to aid in the detaining and transporting to imprisonment and sentence of the sentenced persons named in this warrant, employing necessary and reasonable force. This warrant has the full force and effect of the law. It is a criminal offense and an obstruction of justice for anyone who interfere with the execution of this warrant, issued the 15th day of January 2022, and it doesn't name anybody, as far as I can tell. But, you know, you can use it against anyone. Kevin continues. To further clear up any confusion, these were attached, but only once each, therefore less important than the warrant. It is the sentence of the court that if the defendants evade arrest and imprisonment or otherwise defy this lawful verdict and sentence, they are publicly declared and will be considered to be fugitives from justice under the law. There's more, but you get the idea. They just, you know, made up some stuff and then emailed it to you, and then I don't know what, you're supposed to surrender to somebody? As you can imagine, I was fearful, so I replied, asking how many Walmart gift cards it would take to clear my name. I'll keep you informed if I get a reply from Mr. J. Freedom. So anyway, no reply as of yet. So that's good news. Do they say somewhere in there that you can clean this stuff up by sending gift cards to Walmart? I don't know. But anyway, it gets crazier and crazier. Actually, page 2 is even nuttier than page 1 of this other attachment. The following persons have been duly tried, convicted, and sentenced by the court and are subject to immediate arrest and imprisonment according to the lawful warrant. Elizabeth Windsor, that's the Queen. Mary Simon, Richard Wagner, Justin Trudeau, Stephen Harper, Jean Chrétien, Paul Martin, Beverly McLaughlin, I guess all Canadians at this point. Where does it go any further on here? Bonnie Henry, the estate of Alan McEachern, I don't know, of the Crown of England and the governments of British Columbia and Canada, blah, blah, blah. Oh my gosh, it's just the most amazing thing. And people actually believe, well, it's legal sounding, so I'll just send it to anybody I have a retail complaint about. That's who you're dealing with in this world at this stage. Okay, time now to jump back out. There's something else I wanted to share with you. I'll just send it to you over the weekend to read. But you may remember I mentioned to you that a couple of days ago that there was video circulating of a Texan guy, or at least a guy who claimed to be Texan, who was embedded with the Russian forces in this invasion and I guess had been in Russia for some time. And back in the day when it was, acceptable MAGA-ness to attach yourself to Russia and to Putin, and since then never got the memo that Trump and his MAGA troops were switching sides in order to stay on the popular side here in the United States. Anyway, his video propaganda circulating widely on Twitter. There is a profile of him from Texas Monthly, which is actually a couple years old now. But he was profiled there in April of 2018, so he's been over in Russia for quite some time. Fascinating profile, not something we have time to read on the air. War of Words. Meet the Texan trolling for Putin. He's an interesting character, to say the least. Fringy and weird, no doubt, but making a life for himself over there. And he didn't even have to flee to Russia the way Edward Snowden did. He just chose to up and go to Russia and join in the fight. And he actually joined in the invasion and has been fighting on the Russian side in Crimea and Donbass. And then, of course, he's a rather older than most of the soldiers, I think, and rather heavier than most of the soldiers. And now he's just pretty much a propaganda warrior instead. But I thought I might share that with you for some weekend reading. And now, an angle on Ukraine that we hadn't considered. We bring our good friend Darwin online here and roll his piece on something that, again, now that it's been brought to my attention, has cropped up again and again. The fate of irreplaceable artworks in Ukraine in the wake of the invasion. Some of which have already, it seems, been destroyed. Documented destruction of some important art galleries and museums there in the shelling. Whether it was indiscriminate or not, we can't tell. But you may remember that we discovered recently. Darwin told us a little bit about his art podcasting, so obviously something of personal interest to him. Let me roll it, and I'll share with you the article that it came from, as always. Like I said, great angle. And good to have you here with us, Darwin. Let's go.
Hi there, David, and hello to our listeners around the world. This is Darwin coming to you as the senior art correspondent this time. We have a write-up by Jessica Turner, written up in the Architectural Digest, actually, the Culture and Lifestyle section. And this is really relevant right now for what's going on in the world, today being March 2022. Entitled How the Art World is Responding to the Russian Invasion of Ukraine. Quick summary, artists have pulled out of international exhibitions around the world. Curators have hidden famous works underground, and security forces have wrapped museums in barbed wire. They can see a ransacking in the horizon, so people are taking precautions. All right, so let's just jump into what she has for us here. So with the recent invasion of Ukraine, we're reminded that more often than not, human lives aren't the only casualties of war. Priceless works of art also tend to pay the price of fighting, especially in a highly ideological war. Art and culture are at the center of things and can't always make it out. During the Second World War, art theft and looting unfolded on a massive scale that left pieces by the likes of Raphael, Gustav Klimt, and Van Gogh scattered, without homes, throughout the world. And now, with the war over in Ukraine in full swing, art once again finds itself in danger. This time, however, with the invasion of Ukraine, artists and curators are stepping up to protect precious works of art that have no business being collateral damage in the middle of so much violence. Just yesterday, for instance, Raymudus, who curates the Russian pavilion at La Bendivenzia, pulled out of this year's exhibition. So did artists Alexandra Sokrova and Kirill Sajvikov. Their resignations may not shift the course of the war, but it makes a big statement. The Russian pavilion was designed by architect Alexei Shushev and built between 1913 and 1914. And though it's closed 3 times since its inception, it's never shut down as a political response to an ongoing war. Sachenkov took to Instagram and admitted, "As a Russian-born artist, I won't be presenting my work in Venice." Their resignation is out of deference to those who had to halt their work on the Ukrainian pavilion because of the Russian invasion, which, since it began only a few days ago, has forced more than 400,000 Ukrainians to become refugees, rushing to the border. And male Ukrainians between 18 to 60 are prohibited from leaving the country. They're staying to fight for their land, freedom, and culture. The Russians, however, aren't making defending themselves easy. The soldiers stormed Ukraine from all angles, destroying everything in their path while en route to Kyiv, one of the many architectural casualties in the Ivankiv Historical and Local History Museum. In its namesake city, northwest of the capital, Russian soldiers burned the museum, which was home to 25 works of 20th century folk artist Maria Primachekno, to the ground. Her work may not be as widely known as some of their more internationally established counterparts, but Maria Primachenko is a household name in Ukraine. In fact, one of her works was the decorative backdrop on Ukrainian stamps throughout the 1970s, and 12 years after her death, the United Nations Educational, Scientific, and Cultural Organization declared that 2009 was the year of Maria Primachenko. Today, so many of her colorful works are nothing but ash, blanketing the floor of their former home, which is now just a pile of rubble. In response to the hateful acts against Ukraine and its cultural relics, Ukraine has called on UNESCO to revoke Russia's membership to the organization. For the museums still standing, protecting artwork is complicated for myriad of reasons. Perhaps most urgently, the people who haven't yet fled their beloved country are rushing to enlist. Those on their way out are bringing only the bare minimum, cash, documents, and something to wear. Nobody's wrapping up some art. Plus, Ukrainian citizens can't exactly wrap up a centuries-old painting and pack it between suitcases in their cars. Now, that makes you kind of wonder, like, you never think you're going to be the complete decimation of your country. You never think you're going to be alive for a moment like that, complete decimation of your country. So, if somebody had this sort of foresight, maybe as all the non-fighting citizens are making their way out the country, there could have been a government program, perhaps one that, some of these museums, like over here in DC where we have the Smithsonian, I mean, it's partly government funded anyway. So, all your employees that work there, you secure them and their families and, give them a Van Gogh to take with them, protect it as much as you can, wrap it up in some tin foil or something. Okay, that's not funny. So I'll go on. In order to move pieces and,
It is funny.
In order to move pieces and collections out of the country, state museums must first acquire government permission, which takes time, something the government doesn't have much of at the moment. After all, when tensions with Russia first started sizzling several weeks ago, the executive team at Kyiv's Museum of Freedom was onto something. It applied for permission to move priceless works out of the country. But even more than a month later, nothing has been approved. And it looks like nothing will now that Russian troops have arrived and are looking to take what they believe is theirs. Those museum employees who value the art are desperately seeking storage facilities within the capital in order to save it. But little has been confirmed. The Odessa Fine Arts Museum, mere steps from the Black Sea, doesn't have enough to the storage facility at other museums. That was written kind of funny. At other museums sprinkled throughout the bigger cities. So security spent hours wrapping the perimeter in barbed wire and hid what they could in the basement. Russian art, on the other hand, is in the spotlight for an entirely different reason.
Whoa.
Across 4 floors of the Frank Gehry designed Louis Vuitton Foundation in Paris, a 200-piece collection from the Russian Morozov brothers is proudly on display for several extra weeks. The show, called Morozov Collection, Icons of Modern Art, is the first time the brothers have sent their collection to a museum outside of Russia. The collection features works by Van Gogh, Valentin Serov, and Pierre-Auguste Renoir, amongst others. Though art belonging to Russians is well out of harm's way, the same, of course, can't be said of Ukrainian art. And until the fighting slows, the invasion stops, and Ukrainians have returned to their homes, the fate of the art is as unknown as the fate of this war. This has been Darwin_Darko. I will catch you guys next time.
Okay. Sorry, Darwin. I left the microphone open on there. And, yeah, I'm not bored by the story, obviously. I was actually very interested in it. And a lot of the points that were made, especially, by the way, the point of the Russians just saying, well, this art is ours, and we should come and seize it. But, it's been a long day. And if you do 2 hours worth of the show, you get oxygen starved at the end there. So anyway, I apologize for that and for the clicking and clacking, looking for other stories to share with you before the end of the show. But thank you for sharing that with us. And I love the different angle on it and the many hats you wear as a correspondent for the show. Thanks again. Let's see. Before I depart for the weekend, one more quick thing to share with you. Just wanted to hand you this. I'm not probably going to get all the way through it. But I mentioned to you that just as all of the big lies were falling apart for Donald Trump on the federal level, out in Wisconsin, the former state Supreme Court Justice Michael Gableman, filing his weirdo report trying to further this, just wasn't ready for the turn of events, I guess, in Ukraine and the collapse of the big lie on the federal level. But I have here from the electionlawblog.org, Rick Hazen, whose name you've heard before, and his write-up of this stuff. Actually, it's not even a write-up of his. He's excerpting from the Milwaukee Journal-Sentinel. Gableman report to Wisconsin Republicans promotes legally debunked effort to decertify 2020 election. And his excerpting runs like this. The attorney who led a months-long review of the 2020 election for Wisconsin Republicans, called on lawmakers Tuesday to dissolve the state's election agency and urged them to consider decertifying the results, a move that scholars have called legally impossible. Michael Gableman, the former state Supreme Court justice who led the GOP review, faced immediate blowback for his contention that lawmakers have the power to revoke the state's 10 electoral votes, which went to Joe Biden over Donald Trump, a top Republican in the Assembly, and one of the GOP candidates for Attorney General said there was no way to do that. Gableman was unbowed, saying he disagreed with legal experts who have weighed in on the issue over the last year and a half. They're just all pre-wrong, I guess. When Gableman offered support for the idea, he wrote in a 136-page report released Tuesday that the move would not, on its own, end Biden's presidency. So then why bother, right? There appears to me to be very significant grounds for such an action, Gableman said of the decertification during nearly 3 hours of testimony to the Assembly Elections Committee. Few agree with him, including the nonpartisan attorneys who work for the legislature. The amount of misinformation and faulty legal opinions circulating makes it difficult for many to know who or what to trust. But the fact is, there is no constitutional or legislative mechanism to decertify the 2020 presidential election, said a statement from Fond du Lac County District Attorney Eric Toney, a Republican, running for Attorney General. Also testifying before the committee Tuesday was Eric Cardall, the attorney with the Thomas More Society's Amistad Project. The Thomas More Society and Cardall's law firm share office space with Gableman in Brookfield. Cardall and Gableman have both focused on $8.8 million in grants to the nonprofit Center for Tech and Civic Life provided to Wisconsin's 5 largest cities to help them run their elections during the coronavirus pandemic. That, I guess, is where he thinks the illegality comes in. Gableman's report contends the grants amounted to election bribery. No court has agreed with such claims despite ample litigation. 3 courts and the state's bipartisan elections commission have thrown out the challenges to the grants brought by Cardall. One federal judge has asked the court committee to review whether Cardall violated ethics rules with one of his lawsuits. Gableman's team questioned voting at nursing homes, saying they found some facilities where all registered voters cast ballots. You can bring it right to them in their room. Of course they did. Gableman played videos for the committee of nursing home residents who he said weren't mentally fit to vote. You can tell by video. Only a judge can find someone incompetent to vote. Cardall said he had identified 2 instances of people voting after they were found incompetent, but he and Gableman questioned the ability of others to vote. The videos Gableman showed included exchanges Cardall had with nursing home residents, where he asked them what they thought of the candidates who took various political positions. Ann Jacobs, the Democratic chairwoman of the Elections Commission, scoffed at the videos. People in nursing homes are not required to complete push polls to exercise their constitutional right to vote, she wrote on Twitter. That's the end of the excerpt, and we actually managed to pack it in there. Good for a good review on that stuff. We got to revisit Wisconsin as things get crazier there in the near future. Thanks again to Darwin. Sorry about the lack of oxygen towards the end of 2 hours of broadcast.
You have been listening to Kagro in the morning with David Waldman.
Well, we would do 3 hours of broadcasting if we thought we wouldn't pass out, but we got to hand things off to Justice Putnam to do our 3rd hour instead. Otherwise, I'll just crash and hit my head on the floor, and who knows what's going to happen. Well, as usual, an eclectic stories from around the country and around the world, and probably controlling his yawning, too. Stay tuned for Justice next.